Okay, great. Can you, is my screen shared or no? No, okay, sorry. And now? Good. All right, great. Okay, so today we're gonna talk about the deblender data products from the LSST pipeline. Welcome to the Delegate Assembly. My name is Christina Williams. I'm going to be presenting this tutorial today. And here are some announcements. So I think the first hour, so there's some announcements. First off, if you haven't logged into the cloud, the data.lsst.cloud in a few months, then there are some new things, some new instructions to follow in order to get your account set up. So if you haven't done that, please let one of us on the community science team know. And a reminder about the upcoming virtual summer school. Also, there's a link here to find out more information. So today, for the first hour, we're going to talk about this tutorial notebook number 10. And then in the second hour, we're going to do breakout rooms, and we welcome suggestions for what breakout rooms to create in the second hour. And then if the tutorial presentation goes over a little bit, we'll probably create a breakout room for that too. So think about breakout rooms you might like to have happen in the second hour. Okay, so I'm somewhat new to the community science team, so I thought I would include a short bio to introduce myself to the delegates. My name is Christina Williams. I recently joined the Rubin Observatory staff as an assistant astronomer at Noir Lab in August of 2022, and I've been a member of the community science team since then. But this is sort of my first time presenting, so I want to introduce myself. So I got my PhD at University of Massachusetts Amherst, and my research interests are massive galaxy formation and evolution, primarily focused at high redshift and sort of spanning a large range of different types of galaxies: dusty star-forming galaxies, elliptical galaxies, and galaxy clusters. And so my sort of research interests span a large range in wavelengths from submillimeter to optical. And most recently, before joining the Rubin Observatory science team, I was at University of Arizona across the street, and I was working on I was part of the near-infrared camera team. So the near-infrared camera, or NIRCam, is the near-infrared imager and wide field spectrograph on slitless spectrograph on JWST. So I spent some time on the instrument and science team for that instrument while it was being built. And so that led to a lot of really exciting experiences for me working sort of behind the scenes in an observatory, getting an observatory ready for first light. And so here's a picture of me from last year. I happened to be on shift at commissioning at the Mission Operations Center when JWST had first light on NIRCam. So that was a very exciting moment. And so now my interests are focused a lot on wide area galaxy evolution science. So in particular, I'm right now working on a public JWST wide area survey called Panoramic. Wide area is not as wide as LSST, obviously, but it's about as wide as JWST can do as a sort of small area, small field of view facility. And so I'm really interested in the future in sort of combining wide area JWST science with wide area LSST galaxy science, and opening that window to sort of synergies between those two facilities. Okay, so now I'm just going to provide a brief sort of visual introduction to deblending. So the tutorial I'm going to present today is about the data products that are created by the LSST pipeline when it does deblending in order to identify sources in the LSST imaging, and then also to do deblended photometry in the imaging. And so I'm going to give just a few visual pictures of some of the things that you'll see in the tutorial that might help to better understand some of the products that we'll be talking about. So when we take a picture of the sky, there's many objects and sources in the image, and because of the resolution of the imaging, a lot of galaxies and stars that are sort of along the line of sight with each other will be blended in our images. So one of the challenges we have is to try to identify independent sources. from each other and sort of deblend their flux so we can accurately measure, more accurately measure the number of objects and their different properties. So on the left here is showing just a single band image from the HSC and on Subaru, and this is a picture of the Cosmos field. And so you can see that, you know, with one band, it's quite challenging to figure out which objects are clumps within one object or whether they are independent. And so by using multiple filters and looking at the colors of different structures of things in the imaging, that really helps to identify independent sources. And so what LSST does in the pipeline, we use this software called Scarlet, which works on the multi-wavelength imaging to try to separate out separate objects and deblend their photometry. So you can see on the right here is a color, an RGB image where it sort of helps you see some of the objects that are clearly, it's hard to see in one single object whether or not they're the same object or not in a single filter, but in multiple filters it really pops out. So like an example is this lensed object down in the bottom right, for example. So so this is just a little schematic of a more complicated object. So this is a number of objects that are blended together in an image because they're sort of projected along the line of sight in our image, but you can see that with multiple different colors, they're unlikely to be the same object. So what Scarlet tries to do is identify the different objects within here using the multi-wavelength imaging. And so this is sort of a schematic of how that works. So when objects are blended together, you have these independent peaks coming from the different sources, but they sort of sit on this bigger footprint that is coming from the sort of combined flux of all those objects together. And so this is sort of shows you in intensity versus area, like how you can try to identify independent sources. So some of the things that I'll be saying in this tutorial, I'll be referring to sort of what they call blended parent objects. So these are sources that have been blended together and could be considered one source in the imaging. But because of all these different subpeaks, depending on how your algorithm is set up, you can identify separate child sources. So the child sources are the things that have been deblended from the parent source in the imaging by the deblender algorithm. Okay, so in order to do this, what Scarlet does is it takes the data with the blended objects, it makes a model of those blended objects using the multi-wavelength imaging, and then it can split up each of these independent sources and model the light in order to measure the properties of these different objects independently of each other. And so, on the bottom, you can see sort of how Scarlet has deblended these objects and then measured the light from each of them using a model. And so these little cutouts on the bottom we'll be referring to in the tutorial as footprints. That is my last introductory slide. So I'm going to go now log into the LSST data platform. And so if people want to follow along with the tutorial notebook I'm going to show, then this is a good time to do that. So please also stop me if you have questions in the middle of in the middle if I'm going too fast or if there's some problem with running the tutorials if you're following along. So I'm going to go to the tutorial notebooks directory and make sure I have the right version of this uploaded. And so the notebook I'm going through is tutorial notebook 10, deblender data products. So I'm going to load that up here. So everyone can see my notebook, is that right? Okay, great. Okay, so this tutorial notebook is going to sort of go through, give you an introduction to the various data products that are produced by the LSST deblender. So we use Scarlet, and Scarlet creates all of these sort of keywords and measured properties that can help you use these deblended objects in your science analysis. So there's a paper associated with Scarlet, the software used by the LSST multiband deblender. So you can get more information here. I'm just going to give sort of a high-level overview of the things that are in here and the things that are stored by the LSST pipeline so that you can access them from the data platform. All right, so I showed you a little schematic of what parent sources are. So these are the parent source is sort of identified as a region of connected pixels above a given signal to noise threshold. So these things are all the algorithm parameters are sort of fixed in the LSST pipeline, but one could in principle rerun the deblender on images using sort of custom parameters. But we're not going to talk about that. That's a little more complicated. This is just an introduction to what exists in there. And so the deblender finds these children, which are the sub peaks within a parent source, and then saves the properties to the object table. And so a lot of the keywords I'm going to go through today will help you sort of use these for your own science. So I have a list here at the top of additional resources in case you want more information. So first I'm going to upload, I'm going to import the packages that we need in order to explore the deblender data products. And in particular, I'm going to define two functions for use in plotting throughout this tutorial. So the first one is cutout coad, which I think everyone has probably seen if you've been through some of the other tutorials. This is just copied right out of tutorial 3. And then I'm going to define another function, which is called heavy footprint to image. And this is going to help us visualize some of the deblender footprints that the models that are created by the deblender to identify independent sources. And then I just have some plotting parameters to make things look legible. All right, so the deblender data products are stored in both the TAP service and also in the Butler. So I'm going to import both of those and demonstrate how you can access these deblender products from both of these. And so now we're going to go, how is everyone doing? Is it working for everyone and no problems? Okay, good. All right. So section 2 of the tutorial outlines some of the important keywords that are associated with deblended sources. And so I'm going to go through a couple of them that are very, very useful and probably will be used by almost everybody in their science cases. And then there's a bunch of them listed here that I won't talk about, but detect is primary is sort of the first and most important one. So what happens is when you have these parent objects with the child objects, you don't want to double count the sources in your search. So if you're searching for objects of a certain type, you don't want to accidentally double count the parent and the sort of primary deblended child from that parent. So by setting the flag detect is primary to be true, then this ensures that you only have unique sources in your search, and you're never going to double count things. And so this is a really important keyword to always include. There's a number of other keywords that might be useful throughout sort of various science cases. So like detect from blend is a flag that lets you know if the source was in a blend originally. So there's also parent object ID, which lists the parent ID in the object catalog from which this source, the child source, was deblended. And so this can be useful for keeping track of, I'll show a demonstration, but if you want to, see objects that were all grouped together in one parent source, you can easily go back and figure out which sources were blended using the parent object ID. There's also things like the deblend n child, which tells you how many children were in that blend that got deblended. And then there's also footprint area, which tells you how big this blend was. So there's a couple of other things that are also tracked in the Butler, but not in the TAP. So these things are like the number of peaks that are in the parent's blend. I'm not going to really talk too much about those. But anyway, this section 2 sort of gives you an overview of some of the keywords that you can use to characterize the deblended, the properties of blends and their deblended sort of the deblended properties. All right, so let's start with an example. So first we're going to use the TAP service to search for a really heavily blended object. So here we've set up a search around a predefined RA and DEC. And the reason to do this is because the TAP service The TAP tables are spatially sharded, meaning that they're basically cataloged by area, by part of the sky. And so if you try to search blindly without specifying an area, it can take like, 20 minutes to conduct the search. So we don't want to do that. So we're just limiting to an arbitrary array and deck to try to look for very heavily blended objects. So I'm going to set this running. Yesterday when I tried this, it was running rather slow. So while we wait for this search, I'll just explain a little bit about the search. It's looking for objects that are blended with more than 20 children. So that's a very heavily blended object. And we want a blend that takes up a large area on the sky. So this is a footprint of about 30 by 30 arc seconds. Oh, I see there's a chat question. Oh, wow. Yeah. So I don't know if anyone else noticed this. Yesterday, I noticed that the tap was really slow, but when we wrote this, it only took maybe 15 seconds to run this query. So, so apologies for that. I'm not sure what changed. You can see mine is still running. But maybe now's a good time for anyone to ask questions if there's questions that have come up so far.
What's the value on the 20,000? Is that minutes by arc minutes, or what is?
I believe it's pixel. Is it?
Oh, pixels.
Pixels. I don't know. I forget now. Melissa, do you know what the units on footprint area is?
It should be pixels squared.
That's what I thought. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, my search is still running. Oh, Doug.
Yeah. So I guess a lot of it depends on when the data are being processed, what signal to noise ratio is used to determine what is for the threshold for parents and children is actually I'm not sure if I have a question or a comment. I in the past I worked a little bit with merging galaxies and so there's no good threshold there yet. It's you want things to be done which are not, or things which are, yeah. So I guess do you have any recommendations for the limits of the current thresholds? I guess maybe that's my question.
Yeah, so yeah, I agree that deblending, what to feed the deblending algorithm is sort of an art that maybe needs to be designed specifically for your science case and what you're trying to do. So I think, I guess I don't have a specific recommendation. Also, I've never run the deblender from scratch before. This is just some decisions were made. Probably somebody on this call can answer this question better than I can. But I think some decisions were made to sort of broadly set this up in a way that will work for a large number of different science cases. Does anyone on the call know more about how the LSST deblend, how Scarlet parameters were set for the pipeline that want to?
No, I think we left that out of this notebook, thinking that this is just about all of the data products that you can get related to the deblender. And then we want to have a follow-up tutorial about how to like change the configurations that went into it and rerun the deblender. I forget. I'll sort of look around and see if I can find what the inputs are. Because it's not in this notebook.
Okay. My search is still running. Ah, just finished. Okay, great. Only 3 minutes. 4 minutes. All right. So so this search, just to remind everybody, we were looking for heavily deblended things with more than 12 or 20 children in a large footprint. So I have written out the list of blended sources from the search in this table. So we came up with looks like about 10. And so we saved a number of their sort of key deblended keywords that store information. So detect is primary, you can see is false because we were looking for things that were blended. So these are not they're not the primary source, they are the parent source. So now we can visualize what this looks like by using this cutout to show an image and then plot the parent and the children on top. So we can see what that looks like. So here is, I'm just defining a cutout of this area for one of the objects. So we're gonna start with the first or the second object. And we're gonna use the tap service now to identify the children that are associated with this parent. So this is now searching on objects which have the same parent object ID as the first row of blended parents that we searched in the earlier search. So I'm going to run that. So detect parent object ID is useful to search on because then you can find all of the children associated with the same parent. I think I mentioned that earlier, but now we're going to search on that. And here we're also going to say detect is primary equals 1 because we don't want to double count the parent with all of the deblended children. We want to keep the children, which are primary unique sources independent from the parent, which is not. So we're going to wait for this search to finish again. So if anyone has any questions about that stuff, please let me know.
What's the pi?
Pi is just like the index of the so we retrieved this table of potential parent blends that are very large blends. So pi is just like the row 1. And then we can index on the sort of parents table and just pull out the first one. So it was sort of arbitrary. You can change pi to something else and pick out a different blend, but we thought this one was a nice one to show. So it's like parent index, I guess, rather than pi is what PI stands for.
Yeah, I missed where you declared it, so thank you.
Sorry. Yeah. All right, still searching. Does anything happen with the tap service in the last week or so that made it super slow? I'm pretty sure it wasn't this slow when we developed this. So
This cell took me 4 seconds.
oh,
Yeah, but I ran it right when we started.
I see. Mine seems to be taking multiple minutes.
I was running the service from the portal yesterday and was also quite slow, so I suspect something on their end.
Something must have changed. Anyway, apologies for the slow computation time here. I guess I can, in the meantime, I can also note. Doug, do you want to share your screen instead? If you've already gotten everything.
Yeah, I guess ran everything. Yeah, I thought of all this running thing. When you first started, I just ran everything. So if I can share my screen so you can go through it if you like.
I guess I should have done that.
Oh, it's
Mine just finished. Okay.
okay.
All right, let me see. All right, so I'm going to now plot this search. So just to remind everybody, this was making a cutout of our sort of the first row in our search for very heavily blended parents. So the blended parent is this blue cross right here, the one we picked out. And then we searched for children with the same parent object ID. And so all the children are these red objects. And so This is, kind of a huge blend. I think so. The scale makes it maybe not so obvious that it's a blend, but all of the flux, the low level flux sort of made this a single object. So this is sort of an extreme case, but it's useful to see that. Okay, so now we can.
So what you plotted is about 30 arc seconds by 30 arc seconds. Is that right?
Let's see. I set the bounding box. Cut outside length was 3 times the square of the footprint area. So the footprint area, so it's 3 times 30 by 30, basically, because we had the footprint area we requested was 30 by 30 arc seconds. Okay, so let's start this one. So trying to remember what this part was meant to do here. Okay, I think this was just to have add spatial constraints to our search. So this one is taking a long time again. So now we're going to look at a specific blend and show both the both the parent and the deblended children. And so you can see how the keywords are different for these different types of sources, so you can differentiate them using their keywords. But of course, this is taking a long time again. Doug, did you want to share? You maybe want to share your screen instead? Sorry about this.
Oh yeah, I can do that. Let me
Okay.
do that. Hopefully I get the right one. Let's see. Here we are. Share. And move that out of the way. Are we seeing the right same screen, right screen?
Yeah, so
And
yes.
we're down a little
Yeah,
bit.
so go down a little bit. Yeah, so this table, so now we just did a search on that included both we didn't specify that detect should be primary or that it should be the children or the parent. It's now everything. So you can see here in the column, this includes both parents and children, because we didn't say that detect is primary must be true. So here you see if detect is primary is false, then you can see that that's a parent object or it's a non-unique object. And so that if it's true, you know that it's a deblended child or that it's a unique source. So you can kind of see also how this, how the other parameters sort of validate that. So on the first row here shows detect as primary is false. So this is a parent, and then you can see the number of children that are deblended from it, which is 13. So if you scroll maybe to the right a little bit,
Oh, right.
I think you can see some of the other keywords. So for child sources, you see that they are deblended sources, or one other important keyword is sometimes there's objects that are not deblended at all, and so they are so-called isolated objects, and so those will also be primary, but they will, so like these number 2 and 3, for example, detect is isolated. So there's no parent object ID because the thing is not blended with anything else. So there's some explanations earlier in the notebook. Some of these keywords have specific definitions that mean that they're true or false. So it's important to keep track of all of those things in order to understand what these things mean. But I think the point of this table is just to see that these various keywords store information about whether or not they were blended or isolated or parent or are unique. And so these are things you can use to sort of identify the types of objects you want for your science. All right, so maybe scroll down to the next cell. Okay, so now you can pick out the first source, which is a blend of 13 children. And so we just printed out the number of child objects that are deblended from this source. So now we're going to demonstrate, so that was all sort of accessing these deblender data products using the TAP service. And now we're going to demonstrate how you can do that with the Butler. So we're going to look for the same exact 13 child blend via the Butler. So in that search with the TAP query, we stored the patch and tract that this 13 source blend is located in. So we can now use that to identify to get its data ID and then use it to retrieve it from the Butler. So this next cell 14 is going to do that. And so from this patch and tract where this blend exists, there's like 32,000 objects that are returned. So now we can pull out the one blend that we want from this this Butler this Butler return, which by using the parent object ID, like I mentioned before. So we're going to use the parent object ID of this 13 source blend and then pull out all of its children using that. So that's what cell 15 is doing here. And you can see the 13 child sources that are pulled out using the Butler based on this parent object ID. Okay, so then we have a couple of other ways that are commented out in the next few cells that sort of help you come up with, it shows different ways that you can access this information, but we're not going to run those right now. All right, so then we can make a cutout using the Butler image of that 13 source blend. So that's what this.
Oh, Christina, I will warn you that when I ran this, I got a different deblended deblended objects than you did. So don't be surprised that the next thing doesn't look like the one that you had shown. I'm not sure why. Oh, actually this one's different and also, okay. Anyway.
Well, actually this does look like the one that we identified for this particular thing. It's actually a different blend than the one that we searched for earlier. So,
okay.
So this one is just it's a 13 source blend that it's just a different object. So no worries.
Okay.
Everything looks fine. So here the parent is the yellow circle and then the child sources are the green circles. So this is how, so this is one way to demonstrate how to pull this information out from the Butler and how to search on retain parent and child sources and all of that. Okay, so if you can keep scrolling down. Okay, so we're going to move into the third part of this tutorial, which is to now sort of, we've been through the keywords that the LSST pipeline stores and sort of gave a really high level overview of how some of those keywords can be used in order to make sure you're selecting unique sources or show how you can track from a deblended object to figure out what it was deblended from in case you want to see whether or not this met your science needs or something. So now we're going to do a specialized a little bit of a specialized case where we're going to look in detail at the footprints of the deblended objects. And so this gives you sort of a peek at what Scarlet is actually doing when it models deblended objects. So one of the data products that comes out of the actually, can you scroll up just a little bit? I was so one of the things that the LSST pipeline produces is this deep coad deblended flux product. And so this thing is accessible from the Butler, and we're gonna sort of see these give you some sort of secondary I guess information about what the deblender did. So you can see below here, there's under section 3.1, I'm showing the deep coad deblended flux table, and it tells you some of the things that are stored in there. So so basically we're searching for any of the sort of data products in the Butler that contain the word blend. So here you can see there's like deblended metadata, deep coad deblended flux, which I mentioned, which might be sort of one of the ones that is most accessed. And then there's also some that say deblended model. And so that contains some of the details of what is modeled when when Scarlet runs. So if you scroll down a little bit, we're gonna go back to this 13 source blend that we saw with the green and yellow, and we're going to access its deep co-ed deblended flux schema, so you can see all of the things that are stored in this table. So that's what this long list of keywords is showing. This is the header of one of those tables, and so you can see there's a number of things in here that we're not going to go through, but it's just to sort of demonstrate that there's a lot of information stored, which you can access depending on whether or not you feel like you need to better understand what the deblender did when it modeled your sources. Okay, so we can keep scrolling down. All right, so here we're going to look at the table itself for this one source that had 13 child sources. So again, in this cell 25, we are going to search for objects for which the parent source has parent object ID of that 13 blend source. So here we're showing all 13 of those child sources that had the same parent object ID as that source we were looking at. So here you can see some of the keywords that are stored in that deblended flux schema. So if you scroll to the right a little bit, you can see some of the keywords that are returned. Yeah, so these are all things that are stored that maybe you will use or won't use, but it's nice to know that they exist in case you want to, look into some of the details of the deblender stuff. So all the way at the end, you see that there, okay, let's see. So here you can see the deblended scarlet flux in the third to last column, and then you can see that there were some successful flags to indicate that the deblend was successful, and it sort of tells you the number of peaks from the parent and the number of childs that came out, and all of these things add up to what we expected, which is that there's 13 children from that one source. Okay, so we can scroll down now to section 3.2.
Christina,
Yeah.
how come the RA and DEC don't show up?
Yeah, I don't know. I never understood. I never figured that out. So the RA and DEC are NaN, and this was something that I asked some of the people who actually know something about Scarlet, but I never understood what the answer was. I don't think they. So I don't have a good answer for you, but I think we can try to find out. Melissa, do you know the answer to that? Okay. Sorry about that. Oh, Alex also has some experience with Scarlet. Do you know the answer?
I can make a guess, but it's a random guess. And the guess is that so the astrometric alignment would be done as a different step, and so it may be that you have the WCS defined. So I think you could go from the pixel coordinates to the RA DEC by using the WCS of the image and the pixel centroids that are returned. But you've essentially created a new source table, and so the automated process for doing that may need to be run as a secondary task after the fact. So if that makes sense, right? Like, so you do source extraction before you have the astrometry and the WCS coordinates for the image. So like in a normal pipeline, you would do the source extraction, and then you would solve for the astrometric coordinates, and then you would be able to assign RAs and DECs. And so my guess is that the blending generically is occurring before that the astrometry has necessarily been run. And so you would just need another task in there to get the astrometric coordinates.
Okay.
But if you already have the WCS, as I expect that you do for this image, you should be able to convert from the pixel coordinates to RA DEC. It'd just be an extra operation.
I guess also the RA and DEC are stored in the object table anyway, so you could just use the ID and grab it from there instead. But I don't know why. So yeah, okay, thanks for that explanation.
It's a
Okay.
guess. It's a guess, not an
Or yes,
explanation.
okay. Yeah. Okay, so moving on to section 3.2. So in the introductory slides, I was showing some of the sort of visual demonstrations of what this actually looks like in terms of the footprint that is created for each source based on the deblender input parameters. So here in this section, we're just gonna explore some of the footprints for this 13 source blend that we've been looking at over the last few cells. So, so we're going to go back to, okay, so we're using this deblended flux table. We're going to select on the parent object ID. So we have these 13 sources. And we're going to use this function heavy footprint image that we defined in the beginning to identify all of the, oh, actually, you know what we missed in a couple of cells up. I skipped, so we added something to the end of this DB flux table. So we used this method called the get footprint method, which pulls out, yeah, so if you go all the way to the end now of this table, we basically added the information on the footprint of each of these children. We added that to this table so we can now access that. And so we did that using this get footprint method in cell number 26 here. So this allows you to pull out even more information that's not automatically stored in that table, but we're going to use it in a second to sort of create little footprints for each deblended source, so you can see what the modeling, how the deblender modeled each source. So we're going to do that next. So if you scroll down a little bit, so we're taking these 13 objects. We are going to take that footprint, the sort of metadata on this footprint that we got from the get footprint method, and we're going to turn it into a footprint image using this heavy footprint to image function that we defined. So we're going to call that function. Then if you go down to cell 30, we're going to plot that up for each of the individual children. So if you scroll down to this sort of grid of footprints, what you're seeing here are the way that this is the model source that Scarlett made for each of the 13 blended children. And they're all in their own little cutout, so you can't really see where they are relative to each other, but it gives you sort of a detailed look of what the modeled flux of the child looks like when it goes through and identifies all these peaks and then deblends them. So this in itself, so this is useful for individual sources. It's kind of, for me, I feel like it's easier to see more visually how these little blends got separated from each other in the actual field of view on the sky. So if you scroll down a little bit, we defined, we used these little footprints to sort of reconstruct the field of view of that 13 source blend. So so all of this code here just sort of sets up those little models back onto the original field of view so you can see how they are relative to each other. So these colored blobs here are one of each of the 13 child deblends, and so you can see they're numbered by the number of the sources in the table. So they start with 0 to 12, which is why, but there's a total of 13. And so this is so for that 13 source blend, when Scarlett went through and sort of identified all the sub peaks, this is the way that it broke down the flux from each of those objects and modeled them. So this is useful to, it's sort of a fun demonstration. I don't know if, and I don't know, I feel like looking at it this way helps to visualize what the deblender does when it models these independent sources from one blend. Okay, so we can keep scrolling. Does anyone have any questions about that part, actually? Because now we're moving into a sort of little science application. Okay, all right, I'll just keep going then. Okay, so this last section of the tutorial Section 4 is just a potential use case. I mean, there's a lot of use cases for this. You know, in the introductory slides, I showed a little picture of a strongly lensed galaxy around another galaxy that were blended together. And, you know, strong lensing is probably useful for a lot of, you know, being able to separate strong lenses is interesting. But in this case, we're going to talk about a supernova host and identifying the supernova host in a blend, because supernovae can go off inside a galaxy. And so in principle, those two sources could potentially be blended together. And so we're gonna go through a quick, like a small science case related to that. So we're gonna use a supernova that we have studied in one of the other tutorials. So this is from Portal Tutorial 3 that was looking at a type 1a supernovae near a bright host galaxy. And so and I think there's a couple of other nearby galaxies that make this sort of a slightly complicated field. So we already know the RA index for that. So we're going to define the RA index here. And then we're going to use the cutout function to show a picture of this field. So we do some, yeah. So then we're going to set up this, I guess we're going to get the WCS from the cutout so we can plot the RA and the supernova on it. And then in cells 20 or 36, we're going to plot the object. So this is the deep coad of this object. So on the right is the bright galaxy. The circle shows you where the supernova is, but because this is the deep coad, this isn't, it's not obvious in the deep coad because the supernova is a transient object. So, so this sort of shows you what the field of this supernova is, but we want to see the supernova when it's bright. So we're going to pull that out in a minute here. But this shows you a supernova near a bright galaxy that we're going to sort of study as a test case for the deblender. So if you scroll down a little more, okay, we are going to now query the object catalog to look for other extended blended sources in the vicinity of this galaxy with a supernova transient in it. So we're going to search for objects that are blended, so they have deblend n child greater than 0, so they have more than one child, and we're going to search for those things in a small search radius around this so we can identify the other blended objects in this field. And that's what this table is showing. So if you scroll down to to cell 38, then we can plot. So this one is plotting the parent of one of these heavily blended things that we just searched for in the vicinity of the supernova. And so you can see it's the sort of bright host galaxy in yellow. So this thing has 32 children associated with it. So the scaling for this is sort of doesn't really show the level of blend that this object is. I think, can you scroll up just a little bit? Oh, no, yeah, that's too far. Hold on. go back to. Okay, yeah, all right, never mind. So we're going to play with the scaling a little bit so you can see how many blends actually pop out of this this galaxy if we scroll down a little bit in a different cell. Okay, so we're going to find the children that are blended with this bright host galaxy. So we found that there were 32 children. We're now going to pull those children out into their own table so that we can plot them on top of the cutout. So that's what this cell 39 did. Cell 40 is just going to now replot the cutout, but now with the 32 children of this yellow bright host galaxy. And so you can see this is a rather complicated field. There's the bright host galaxy in yellow. This thing has 32 children, which are in green. And then again, the supernova host that we don't see in the coad is in magenta. So, so I think here is where you could, I guess, so, well, actually, it's not really important. There was a place where we could change the scaling to really see it pop out, but it's not. It's not that important, but actually Melissa, wasn't there supposed to be a part of this where the supernova does show quite bright?
These are deep coads, so you won't see the supernova.
There wasn't, for some reason when I was running it last night, I thought there was a part where we can alter it so you can see the, never mind. Okay, never mind. I must have remembered that wrong.
We tried changing the scaling to pull out a potentially like faint host that is there and looks distinct from everything else. So here it's like, we know there was a supernova at magenta. And if we play with the scaling, it looks like there's a separate host galaxy there that's not deblended from that big galaxy at right.
Oh, but it's also not actually a child as identified by the deblender.
Yeah, what we
Oh,
think
maybe
is
that's,
the host doesn't get deblended. So this is like a danger use case.
so we put linear in A sin H instead of A sin H here to see that.
Oh, try that. See if you can,
Yeah, okay, this is what I remember.
okay.
So actually, Melissa, is this yellow source the host galaxy of the supernova, or is that little blob that didn't get deblended the host galaxy?
I forget if I went back to truth and figured that out.
Because this whole time I'd sort of thought that it was the yellow host, but now you're right that the supernova probably shouldn't come out. And so the coad is like, how the coad in the simulation corresponds to how many years of data?
6 years of
Years
data.
of data. Okay. So you shouldn't see the supernova at all in the coad in that case.
Sometimes you do though.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, the way the coads are made for DP0.2, they took the third of the images that have the best seeing. Sometimes there's a supernova in there if you do it that way. Sometimes the median combine, or like the fancy combine that they use, sometimes it takes the supernova out. But yeah, notebook 7A does just show, I think, a little bit about how sometimes there's supernova contamination in the template. But the point here, that's not the point here. The point here is more if you just look at this image at the location of the supernova and you play with the scaling, you go, oh, it seems like there's another galaxy there that's not getting deblended. I don't think I went back to the truth. I didn't close the loop on this yet and go back to the truth data and figure out which is the true host. I don't think, at least I didn't put it in this notebook. So.
But in any case, it is kind of a nice example of how the sort of default parameters for the deblending may or may not actually achieve what you specifically need. So, if someone really wanted to dive into that, they would maybe need to rerun the deblender with different parameters for this one particular image.
Yeah.
And I think there's some existing more intermediate tutorials on how to run the deblender for, in a different setting that I think Alex wrote in the Stack Club tutorials. And
yeah, number 5 kind of sets you up to do that too, although we don't actually change any input parameters in number 5.
Yeah. So anyway, that's sort of the end of this tutorial. There are some exercises for the user at the end to try to recreate the footprints, but for the supernova case. So yeah, that's all I have for this tutorial. If there's any questions.
I've got a couple of questions. I haven't looked at the definition of a footprint in a while, but if you look at the entire image is a footprint, and so you've got to define where a footprint may be a collection of children, but how do you define where the parent ends?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know exactly so what the Scarlet settings are for the LSST deblender, but I think it is sort of it is, it's sort of an art to determine how to do that in order to achieve whatever science goal you're specifically trying to do. So I think yeah, so I think that's not a, it's not a, there's no good answer for that, I think, in terms of, in a general sense, but yeah,
Right.
it's a problem. I think people actively try to solve that for specific science cases.
The other thing I was wondering if you could, I don't know if you can address this or not, but I was surprised, maybe I shouldn't be, at the asymmetry in the 13 images.
Oh, meaning the asymmetry of the distribution of children, or?
Well, you look at the objects and I mean, one looks like Mickey Mouse and, you know, I mean, if you go back to those 13. There,
Oh, you mean the footprints are asymmetric?
yeah, I mean, the children, right? They're,
Yeah, sorry, the children are, yeah, asymmetric, yeah. No, it's true. I imagine that if you were to alter the deblender properties or parameters, then you could make it more sensitive to these smaller Mickey Mouse ears and have those be separated out, but you know, it's probably a rabbit hole of like where do objects begin and end?
yeah, just highlights how complicated the blending is.
Yeah, I think it's a complicated problem. Yeah. Greg.
Yeah, just a quick question, and maybe that's just me not knowing exactly how you got to the point where you're here. But can you restrict the time ranges over which you actually pull out the data, as opposed to take just the full data set for Rubin?
Yeah, so I think especially for the supernova case, you would probably want to do that, and you would want to search for the sort of where the difference image is significant, and then you could pull out the images around that. And I think they actually do. Actually, I'm not entirely sure how they do for the non-deep co-added data, where they pull things out for the source catalog and not the object catalog, which I believe the source catalog is not from the deep co-added data. Is that right?
Yeah, I don't know. That's why I'm asking, because you know.
Okay. Yeah, actually, I don't know if they how much data is required in order to run the deblender, multi-wavelength deblender, because the images are taken. I don't know if all the 5 filters are taken at the same time for every, I guess, CalExp file. Does anybody know the answer to that? And whether or not the deblenders run on those sort of.
You can make your own coads, right? So you could go in that area and just make coads just for that period, that time period that you wanted.
Yeah,
Okay.
you could. Yeah, that's true.
That's
But
my
then
question.
would the LSST pipeline give deblender outputs for images that are not the final deep coad, but for.
So
Okay.
if you recreate your own custom coad and then you run source detection and deblending on it, then yes, you can get deblender outputs. We do not have a tutorial about that right now. We used to have a custom coad. An update to the LSST science pipelines completely broke that tutorial. So can't actually do any of that right now. So.
Brian.
Hi, yeah. So if we wanted to find like what are the options to the deblender that we could use, is there a good place to go for that? Like, you know, just a link to like what are the parameters of the deblender that can be changed?
I think you can't change them unless you rerun the deblender yourself.
Right, but yeah, like if you rerun it, what are the options?
Oh yeah, so
a help page or something.
Right, yeah. So Scarlet has so you can install Scarlet on your own machine, and it has some documentation that would
Okay.
probably include all of that stuff. And there is a paper linked to this notebook that I think
Mhm.
may also contain some of that, but it definitely has the link to the software where you would see all the documentation. Melissa, it
Okay,
sounded
so
like-
find the Scarlet documentation. Okay.
Yes, yeah, Scarlet documentation, yeah. Melissa, did you want to add something to that?
Yeah, that's what I've been sort of working on over here. So notebook number 5 does show how you can like you can get the source to blend task, and then you can look at all the configuration parameters for it. But well, I have some questions related about that, and I'm just about to post to the forum, so I will just link you to that post in a moment.
Okay.
Perfect, thanks.
Jen.
Thank you for taking the time to do this. It was a great presentation. I really appreciate it. So now, if it's okay to get into details, tell me if it's too much. But so I was thinking about extended objects on the sky, right? And perhaps decomposition, population disentanglement. So do you automatically by default, let's think of something really big on the sky that, LSSC will definitely encounter, the SMC. Is this deblend product automatically, is SMC and the pixels, associated with that automatically excluded from the deblend? How sensitive can you be? Like, because effectively you will step over the SMC, right? And you will look at, different parts of it, right? How do you deal with extended objects that are quote unquote nearby, or, eventually you get into a realm where there are other just big galaxy extended objects too at a certain redshift, right? How do you really understand with the deblender that these are part of, it's still that single extended object as opposed to, oh, hey, it's, I know these different pixels are triggering, and I know you do the comparisons to the models, but like how do you deal with extended objects, and especially those that are going to be in special classes, for instance, like the LMC, SMC, stuff like that.
Yeah. That's also a good question. I don't know the answer to. Does anyone else on the call know? I also am not sure if there are objects like that in the DP0.2 simulation. So it might, but this is a good question for when we get real data, because of course there will be large objects that are mapped. So does anyone else know the answer? Or
I think you're right that this is not in DP0.
oh, okay. All right.
I should have made a request to the teams and been like, hey guys, really?
Yeah, I mean, I guess if no one else knows the answer, my guess is that it's the things like that will still be deblended with the same parameters as, that's sort of optimized for the rest of the data set. And so those may not be very, you may want to run it again with a customized set of parameters instead, because
so now then do you envision that potentially, so this also kind of links to Doug's question as well about merging galaxies, right? Because that was another thing that popped in my head.
right.
Do you guys envision, like for a particular science case, having, just with the help of our science collaborations, having us, run the deblend with our specialized parameters, specifying those in some sort of documentation, and then re-ingesting that table so that people don't have to reproduce this type of result again and again? Do you see my point? Like, oh, hey, here's our prescription for deblend, and this will, help you disentangle this set of objects, right? And then that way, people can have this as a lookup table as opposed to, reproducing that effort. Is that what you guys envision, or is that something you're thinking about?
Maybe I can, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question exactly in the Rubin sense, but from other surveys I've been a part of, which did similar things, whether it was deblending, early SDSS and dark energies survey, there's just not the resources to do special cases, and I suspect that may be the case here. But there is always the option of someone producing a value-added catalog for a specific and providing that in one way or another. So in both SDSS and dark energy survey, I'm sure also like Pan-STARRS and other surveys, either people within the survey project itself or outside have produced a value-added catalog, which then people could use. I'm also thinking back at the other previous question for really large objects like SMC or something. I'm wondering if that's good. That I can imagine being more of a case of not a deblending issue, or I mean, it'll be deblended. I mean, it'll be run through the deblender, but I suspect that if one wants to do but I suspect like the SMC or LMC, it'd be more of a case of your background changes, and you want to, and someone, maybe Alex can say something about this from his experiences with the Delve survey. Is you might be modeling a background, and it should be the SMC, and then the blending objects within that. I don't know. I think, yeah, and Melissa or Greg might have a better idea of what the Rubin plan is, but I suspect from the previous experiences, it's going to be hard to do for the project to kind of do optimize things for every sort of science case. But I don't know, Melissa or Greg or someone.
I was just prepping a forum statement. Could you briefly recap the question?
Okay. So Jen was asking about I'm sorry if I get if I don't get this quite right, was I guess the question was the project planning on optimizing the blending for different different science cases, and I for instance, you have like the SMC or other objects which, or merging galaxies or something, where you and producing special cases so individuals don't need to redo that step all the time. And I just, being the experience that I've seen in previous large surveys where there is deblending or other special cases, I was thinking I don't know what the official Rubin policy is, but I suspect that there's just not the time or resources to do things do special deblending for different objects. But that would be sort of a value added catalog that people either within the project or outside the project may produce, and that may be something that is either accessible from, maybe made accessible from Rubin data products or something, possibly. I know in Dark Energy Survey and SDSS, there's the main thing, but there's also like there's like a little there's also links to places where you get value added catalogs. I suspect that might be something, but I suspect that as typically there won't be a bit. I don't think there's the human effort, FTE to do things for every
Oh no, I wouldn't think that. And no,
Yeah.
it's just
I can
like
answer-
practical experience.
I can answer
go
the
ahead.
question. Yeah. So there has been discussions in the past of doing something very different, like different in crowded fields. So field crowdedness depends what you do. I'm not sure where those discussions went to. I suspect that what users really want is something that's applied consistently over the entire field, and that is what the decision is going to be. This is a perfect question for the data Q&A. So if I'll link you to that, you get a question in there, we take it to the data management system science team. So I'll link that in the chat. Yeah.
Sorry. No, so there's two aspects to my question, and it's okay. It's more for food for future thought, right? The first is, like you guys said, hey, we already considered this, which is, what do you do? And it's not necessarily value added catalog. It might be even value added prescription, right? Because you want to repeat this type of thing over and over again, right? But yeah, just saying, hey, how do I separate a XYZ object? And then, by the way, let me make it, available to anybody who else wants to separate out XYZ object, right? The second thing is how can I be crafty in using this awesome deblender tool, right? How can I, push it forward? I was even thinking about, like I said, population decomposition. How crafty can I be? And I'm just wondering, you guys can't answer this right now, but it'd be nice to see, where we can take this tool and how we can push it forward. But yeah, thanks for the discussion. I appreciate that, guys.
Are there more questions, or does anyone want to talk about other aspects of this? We can also start breakout rooms if anyone has topics that they want to break out to discuss. Oh, Doug.
Yeah, I had a quick question. Well, maybe a quick question. Do you have a feeling how Scarlet compares with, say, Galsim? There's another sort of deblending and modeling software. I mean, or does anyone on the call have an idea? I know it's kind of a specific question.
Like also source extractor or some of the other,
or like sources. It looked like it kind of has similarities with source extractor. I know for like merging galaxies and lens things, people will often use Galsim, but it's very resource intensive. But that was a few years ago. I'm not sure if things have sped up since then.
so actually I don't have any experience running Scarlet independently from just looking at what's produced here. I have run source extractor in the past. That was, I don't know, like when in the past when I was focused on Hubble imaging when I was a student, with that. And so that's really the only, I think I'm most familiar with that. And I've never compared it to anything else. So I don't have a good answer for your question, but maybe someone else has done this on the call. But maybe not, I don't know. Probably Fred Mulcamp knows the answer to your question, because I think he's been a key component of integrating this deblender into the pipeline. Isn't that right? Someone who's probably been part of the project longer than me would know who to ask. Okay. If there's any other questions, please let me know. Otherwise, I guess we can brainstorm some breakout rooms for people to have discussions about anything.
I wonder if we could get one for AI code generation.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Am I the host? And actually, should I stop recording or? Okay.